Hello dear chess lovers, our middle game training continues today with this beautifully rich Catalan position. Catalan players, you will love this episode. I will show you very typical and recurrent patterns and chunks in this beautiful opening. In this video, we'll also learn to look at the imbalances in the position, read the board properly, and increase the imbalance that favors us. In the end, I will also finish with a beautiful calculation exercise for you. Are you ready for this beautiful middle game plan making training, folks? Let's begin. What are you seeing, folks? It's white's turn right now. Black has an extra pawn. White built this beautiful pawn center on d4 and e4. In return, black has an extra pawn on c4, which they just protected with the move b7, b5. We have this Catalan bishop on g2. Please take a step back and ask yourself, what are those imbalances in this structure that is in my favor? In terms of king safety, well, they're equally safe, let's say. Yeah. When it comes to material, we are down a pawn. Okay. When it comes to piece activity, generally, I think our pieces are a little bit better. When it comes to the pawn structure, folks, you should very quickly spot this imbalance that is in white's favor, right? For all of our sufferings, we are down a pawn. We got ourselves a beautiful central pawn duo like that. So our middle game goal can be to increase its impact directly in this position. Okay? Now the question becomes, well, let's start from this even now. If you give the move to black, they might play the move b4, chase the knight that is supporting the e4 pawn, followed by taking on e4. In this position, you have to react. You are facing a little threat of b4 followed by takes on e4. So that's a critical moment for us to react against the opponent's idea. All right, given this orientation phase that our central duo is a strength, maybe there's a way for us to intensify this central advantage. What are your candidate moves? You see, we are generating candidate moves given this orientation phase. The first candidate is obviously e5, and the second candidate must be the move d4 to d5, folks, right? Given this orientation phase, also given that I'm facing a threat right now of b4, I'm looking at these forward but also forcing moves, right? That might give me something in the middle of the board. Okay? What do you think about the move e5, folks? What are your observations about the move? What are the potential drawbacks of that move, if I ask you this way? Can you see, folks? e5 allows a gigantic hole on d5. You're creating an outpost on d5 and you're inviting the move knight d5 at that moment. So from purely positional reasons, it only helps black indeed. You're also giving yourself a backward pawn on d4 on a semi-open file for the rest of the game. Okay? That knight will be an excellent piece, blunting your Catalan bishop and so on and so on. Also, white cannot follow this with moves like knight g5 to attack h7, right? Sometimes these ideas exist, by the way. e5, because the idea might be to remove the guard of the pawn on h7, and once the knight moves, maybe you can very quickly attack that pawn and force a concession, let's say. The problem is black is controlling g5 with the bishop and the queen as well, so that won't work for white. Okay? Don't give up on the major imbalance. We are better in center of the board. We must do something as well given the threat. So d5 comes to mind. d5 also hits the bishop. Okay? And also, can you see the alignment between the rook and the queen? Even the rook on d1 is actually supporting the d4, d5 pawn break. Okay? Now I get excited. What could be the point of the move? Well, you sort of force this move, right? Otherwise, once the bishop moves, I can take on b5 or I can take on e6 to activate my rook and so on. So after d5, you expect e takes d5. Now comes my question to you, folks. Do you take back on d5 or can you see even a stronger move for white at that moment? What has changed? Please look at the new pawn formation. What has changed is this knight no longer has the d5 outpost because there's a black pawn that is filling that square, folks. Can you visualize? d5, e takes d5, e5 becomes a candidate. Why? Because you repel the knight, and once the knight moves, you simply want to take on d5 with your knight, opening up the d file as a result as well. That knight also has to go to a terrible spot from f6, right? You don't give them this d5 outpost for free, and you get a good position as a result. Indeed, that's the best plan for white. This is actually called simulated pawn exchange, folks. You simulate that you will take back on d5. In fact, you just push the other guy. This is a beautiful positional pattern. Again, simulated pawn exchange. You first push the first guy, and instead of taking back, you roll the other guy. Look at this. Knight d5 is not possible. If they go knight e4, that only helps us. We'll see it very, very soon. But where is the knight going otherwise in this position? You see the point? You simply don't allow knight d5 to black, and you also want to activate and open up your pieces. Even the bishop gain more scope on this diagonal, and even it's not even clear there is a knight on f6 going. Knight e4 is the game continuation. Let's look. You don't take on e4, but you take on d5. This was the whole point of the entire operation. Even here, right? This knight is now hanging. Your bishop gets happy. Your rook gets happy on the d file. Notice how we also repelled black's threat of b5, b4, and so on. You got instant play in the center of the board, and you disorganized the black pieces in the process. Bishop takes d5, rook takes d5. Well, they moved knight to c5 because it was hanging, and now comes the beautiful tactical segment. You take on a8 first, folks. Now comes my question to you. White to play, Catalan players, this tactical team is important for you to know. It emerges time to time in the Catalan opening. White to play and win. The prompt is this, folks. The knight on f6 disappeared. As we know, the queen's already putting pressure on h7. Now that pawn is a loose pawn. It's attacked once, guarded only once without the knight on f6. Now, have you seen the alignment as well on this diagonal? Right? Tactics emerge from loose pieces or pawns or certain alignments on the board. Now, please combine the loose pawn on h7 and this alignment between the bishop and the queen on a8 and the ability of the knight to potentially jump to g5 and create a mate in one threat. Please combine these ideas and find the combination. Bam! Rook takes d7 is a beautiful move. Even this is winning, but I think rook d7 is even stronger. You simply clear the diagonal. That's the function of this move. Knight takes d7, and now it's one step closer to our dream, right? Knight g5 is coming. Checkmate in one is the first threat. Bishop takes the queen is the second threat, and black cannot parry both threats. A very typically beautiful Catalan tactical team for us, and black simply resigns after bishop takes g5, bishop takes a8, bishop takes c1, let's say. White emerges with extra material, and they have a winning advantage in this position. In this position, rook takes c5 was also winning, but here, after knight takes c5, knight g4, you're giving them a chance to play the move knight e4, folks. Can you see it? Black can now block this diagonal with their knight while also stopping this checkmate in one. Bishop takes e4, of course, comes to mind, but the problem is now it's no longer checkmate on h7, so they will offer a queen trade. You can take on h7, but it's not mate. Of course, white is still winning with best play, but this is not as technical as rook takes d7 in this position. That's also a beautiful calculation exercise. You compare. That's a beautiful comparison. We are 100% sure right now that we will move them while capturing one of those knights, right? But we are actively searching for the best reaction from our opponents against either of these moves. And this is less technical because they can block with their knight on e4. If you take with the queen, black is very happy, right? Black is very happy to trade the queens, right? So after knight e4, you don't want to retreat the knight either because there's no more checkmate in one threat. Of course, you are still better, but it's not the same. So you compare this variation with the variation of rook takes d7 and knight g5. What has changed is there is no more knight e4 blockage, and it becomes obvious that they must give up their queen right now, and we achieve a winning material advantage as white. Once again, folks, reading the board properly, not playing e5 because of knight e5, right? This clearly favors black in this position. They get a beautifully stable knight on e4. And yes, you created e4 square for your knight. The problem is black will also use this beautiful d3 point for their pieces, activating their bishop and so on and so on. It's not the same kind of attack on the king side. The rook is shut down from the d file as well. And also your pawns have lost the mobility, right? You give away a crucial d5 outpost to black pieces. Compare this position with first pushing d5 and not allowing black to use the d5 square, right? Beautiful positional pattern, simulated pawn exchange. If they go knight g4, your reaction is the same, folks. Knight takes d5 is a very, very powerful move. Well, if they capture on d5 again, same stuff is going on. The problem now is the g4 knight. After c6, rook d4, for example, that knight is facing issues. That knight is pinned, so knight e5 doesn't work, right? Suddenly, it's not clear where the knight is going from g4. I mean, if it just goes to h6, then you can even take on h6, folks, to rip open their king side, followed up rook d1, and that knight will be captured on the next turn. Just look at white's piece activity reaching enormous proportions. After rook d4, maybe you can play for these tricks, takes bishop c5, but even in this position, folks, let's look at this position, takes for example, but even in this position, white has two minor pieces for rook, and the middle game, that's a clear advantage for white. So with best play, white still keeps a clear advantage in this position. And finally, after e5, if you think about this counter-attacking move, b4, it never works because e takes f6 actually attacks the bishop as well, and white simply wins a piece in this variation. So, taking a step back, d5 is clearly the only move that gives white a clear advantage. And it's all because of the reading the situation properly, understanding the basic imbalance that is in white's favor, very typical in Catalan, right? You give up the flank pawn on c4 to gain central pawn majority. And in this case, we talk about the ideal pawn center, pawns on d4 and e4, that they can even move. We talk about mobile and ideal pawn center for white. And we already know that mobile pawn center is a great force in chess if used properly. If you impulsively play e5, you give stability to black. It's not good for white at all. But if you first start with the move d5, surprising looking move, but only play e5 on the next turn, you gain advantage. If you take back with the pawn, that's still slightly a better position for white, by the way, folks. But here, you see the problem? The problem is black will also use the newly created outpost on c5, because by pushing the pawn to d5, you also gave some squares to black pieces, and it's not clear how exactly we are crashing through. If you go ahead and take on b5, folks, it's not going to be the same, because after they take back, the queen is shooting on the d5 pawn in its position, and they can take on d5, and complications actually favor black in this position. With this very accurate move, bishop e4, black is in fact getting a slight advantage in his position. So after bishop b7, the only move that gives white a small advantage is a very typical Catalan follow-up, knight d4, right? You're using this d4 square for your knight this time. Also open up your bishop. The bishop now guards the pawn on d5. Sometimes the knight can go to c6. Sometimes it can go to f5, right? The knight has potential. But of course, with some good play, black will also gain some good squares for their pieces. For example, knight c5 is very typical in those structures. Maybe it can go to d3 or b3. And again, it's a complex position with chances for both sides. Objectively, white is slightly better in this position, probably after moves like knight c6 already. But you see, that's already the first step. Can you even sense that your play emerges from the center? That's your existing advantage, and that's your basic middle game plan. Because most players memorize some moves, they come to a position like this, then they have no clue what to play for, right? Like they have all the memorization, they know all the moves one by one. And when they reach a position like this, they have no understanding whatsoever about those basic imbalances, which plans are they are playing for, and what should they do in general in a position like this. So that's why we should study our openings like this, in recurrent and important chunks, always connecting to the why question and explaining ourselves by looking at those imbalances, why such plans must be quite powerful. Sometimes you can even find those ideas, d5 followed by e5, by using progressive deepening, right? You start analyzing the move e5 for some time, but you don't really like this knight d5 resource. You're sort of an impasse, but you also know, you sense that you must play in the center of the board, given this basic imbalance, right? Then since you didn't like this knight d5 resource, maybe then you become creative and you start with the move d5 first, right? Just to improve on the first idea of yours. This is called progressive deepening of our calculations. We start from analyzing one move first, we find some problems in this line, just like knight d5, and we tweak the move order to make our existing idea work, right? We tweak the move order to make our basic idea work in a better context. That's exactly what's going on with this push of d5 followed by e5. Yes, e5 was one of the main ideas for white, right? To activate the bishop, to activate the queen, and so on and so on. But pushing e5 directly only helps that knight. Thus, you start with a different move and follow it up with your main idea of e5, and you reach your positional goal. Here is your homework position, folks. It's white to play. Please find a good plan for white in this position. That's a game of Hans Niemann with white pieces. Please choose a good plan for white, another Catalan structure for us that resembles our main study today. Please tell me not the first move, but also how would you react to that move? What will be your ensuing game plan, so to speak, right? If I ask you, yeah, make a couple of moves in a row and tell me the basic schema of your plan, you know, where you want to put your pieces, what's your basic plan from this position by reading the board properly, okay? And even end up with an evaluation in the end. Maybe white doesn't have much advantage, maybe it's, in fact, black is who is better. So also tell me your evaluations in the resulting position, okay? I love Catalan opening myself. I played it almost for my entire life. And I hope the lessons were useful for you. I will probably at some point make a separate video about common Catalan patterns and chunks. And I will catch you on the next episode where we form beautiful middle game plans and engage in plan making by reading the board properly. Thank you so much.